Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. The latest edition of the Inside the Birds pod came out this morning. Andrew DiCecco joins the show every Thursday here on the Sports Bash. Josh Hennick filling in for Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN. And today's Football at 4 is being brought to you by the Gallery Bar, Book, and Games and Ocean Casino Resort. Go to the Gallery, go to Ocean, go for the win. For more info, visit theoceanac.com. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And speaking of going for the win, Andrew DiCecco is the champion of all the Eagles writers this year. He got 51 of the 53-man roster projections correct and 10 of the initial 13 practice squad players right. So Andrew DiCecco, congratulations. You are the champion. How do you plan to celebrate?
I appreciate that, and I think my pal John McMullen said it best. He said it's the most exclusive club this side of the U.S. Senate. And, it's certainly something I don't take lightly. So, no, it was a lot of fun. It was cool to see.
Yeah, for those who didn't hear, Andrew was with Jeff Mosher and Adam Capel on Monday's edition of the Inside the Birds pod, and Andrew has been writing about all the machinations with the Eagles roster over at InsideTheBirds.com. So, Andrew, speaking of that roster, I want you to start with this. For you, I know that, one of the conversations we've been having before you came on today has been about the fact that, Howie Roseman and the Eagles, they look at this as not the 53, but as the 69. All of the practice squad, all the roster players. So for you, even though you predicted a lot of these guys, was there still any surprises or any players or moves that stood out for you?
No, not really. I thought that there was a chance they can go 10 linemen, which is what they've done each of the past two seasons under Nick Sirianni. I had Josh Andrews on my 53 as the backup center. But I think if I'm looking at a mild surprise, I think I would probably say Mario Goodrich hanging on, because I had him only keeping 6 corners. But when you look at the waiver wire, young corners were getting claimed, and I think that obviously played into it. You don't want to expose a young corner to waivers if you think that there's a chance you might lose them, obviously. So he sticks as the backup corner, as a backup slot, I should say. And I think that he would be active on game day because he was a factor on special teams in the preseason. So that was a good, a good addition to the team. And he had a really solid summer. And when you're comparing it to Eli Ricks, I thought that Mario Goodrich had the more consistent summer in practice. And I thought on the field was when you really saw Eli Ricks turn it up when the lights came on.
You mentioned Josh Andrews in center. I mean, do you expect them to make another move at some point? Because as of right now, the only guy not named Cam Jurgens who has legitimate center experience, I believe, is who? Julian Good?
Julian Good-Jones on the practice squad, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, do you anticipate some other moves to be made eventually? Because, I mean, I don't think the Eagles want to be – if let's say Kelsey goes down with, a major cramp, right? And he misses 2 quarters, right? Or, let's say he has a minor injury. He has to miss 1 week. I don't think the Eagles want to kick Cam Jurgens out of guard and put him at center and then put Driscoll at right guard.
Right. I mean, if there's one thing that we've seen from Jeff Stoutland is they're not really inclined to move around so many different pieces and disrupt the continuity on the offensive line. So I would have to think that there's going to be something coming down something that's going to be coming down the pike in the near future. Maybe that's bringing in a Josh Andrews, who is a vested veteran on the practice squad at some point, maybe signing him to the roster after week 1 so his contract isn't guaranteed. There's a number of different ways they can do it. Julian Good-Jones he had a good summer as well, and he could be a candidate to be elevated on game day. You can only elevate a specific player 3 times in a season before you have to make a decision on that player. So basically, on the options that the Eagles have had this summer, I would say Josh Andrews possibly, or Julian Good-Jones.
Now, you mentioned calling him up for the practice squad. Well, they can't call everybody up from the practice squad, right? Some guys are going to have to not make it. So on a game day, let's say things stay as is, Andrew. Who would you anticipate gets the call up from the practice squad?
Well, you have to have a punter. So Aaron Sipas is going to be one of them. And I think that, Zacchaeus, if you really want to, if you really are splitting hairs here, Zacchaeus could return punts. He hasn't done it a ton. I think only a few times at the professional level. But Britton Covey could be a candidate to be promoted. And I think Ben Van Sumeren, from a special team standpoint, he flies around the field. He's really fast, really tenacious going down there on kick coverage. I think you need somebody like that on game day because they waived Kyron Johnson, who was a guy who logged a lot of special team snaps for them last season. You obviously don't have Zach McPherson. You don't have Sean Bradley for the season. Both of those players are unfortunately lost with a torn Achilles. So I think adding to the special teams unit for game day should be a priority. And I would probably say Ben Van Sumeren.
You mentioned the special teams. Andrew DiCecco joining us on the Elite Acura hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. What are your thoughts on the special teams, Andrew? Because no Zach McPherson, no Sean Bradley, two guys who were a part of that special teams. You know, Devin Allen got a little playing time. You mentioned Van Sumeren got some action. You know, what do you think the Eagles will or should do with the special teams?
Yeah, it's going to be really tough. I think core members this year are going to be Patrick Johnson, Christian Ellis. And then after that, you have to see who's going to really assert themselves. I think Ben Van Sumeren's a player who really thrived in that facet of the game, but I don't view him as a player who's going to be signed to the 53. I think he could be elevated a few times when they need him, and then maybe they'll have to make a decision. But I think Mario Goodrich is going to be a player who's going to be a factor on special teams. And then after that, they don't have a ton of but typically linebackers and safeties are your core guys there. But right now, Patrick Johnson is ascending to that leadership role. He played 75% of the snaps on special teams last year. Eli Ricks played a little bit of special teams. You saw him make a nice block in that final preseason game, paving the way for Devin Allen down that right sideline. So he's a guy who can also see some time if he's able to really earn the confidence and trust of Michael Clay to be able to carry out his assignments. So they have some guys. It's just they've really seemed to have hamstrung Michael Clay, at least on the surface, in terms of sort of cleaning out his cupboard of players that were on his roster, on his unit last year. That may not necessarily be a bad thing because the Eagles didn't have a great coverage unit, but I think continuity is pretty important and kind of an under-discussed element.
Andrew, you mentioned Eli Ricks. Let's get to the cornerbacks here. It really feels like there's a lot of guys they didn't want to lose. If they waive them, guys like Ricks, guys like Keely Ringo, who they just drafted. Also, Josh Jobe has definitely earned himself a roster spot. So, what is your perspective on the corners not named Slay, Bradbury, Maddox?
The next best corner on the roster, I can definitively say, is Josh Jobe. He would be the guy that if they kick Bradbury inside on any occasion, he's going to step out and be that top outside corner. Thought he looked really good early in camp and seized that top backup role, which was formerly held by Zach McPherson. But I think that Josh Jobe gives them a tough, tenacious, long-arm corner on the perimeter that's played at a high level. I told you I had a late round pick on him, and unfortunately he went undrafted for different reasons and had a down year at Alabama. So that was the primary reason for that. But I think that then you look further down the line, I don't believe that Keely Ringo's equipped to contribute right away. He seems to be more of a work in progress, a pretty raw prospect. You saw him go through some growing pains in the preseason, which it's not abnormal. He just turned 21 years old. So I think that folks are going to have to bear with him a little bit. I think that it's everybody progressed at different speeds, but I don't know that he'll be a factor on game day, at least initially. So Mario Goodrich would be somebody that I think would be active. And Eli Ricks, I'm not sure if he's going to have a role on the active game day roster, but I think later on down the line, he possibly could. And I kind of see that shaking out, at least in the early going.
Andrew, when you think about the fact that they have so many corners, a majority of those guys play outside, though, is there a concern for you, knowing Avonte Maddox's injury history, that maybe the Eagles kept too many outside corners?
Well, that's why they kept Mario Goodrich. Mario Goodrich is the backup slot, and I thought he looked the most adept at playing that, really transitioned well from playing primarily on the outside last summer, and I thought that that's a big reason why he's on the team this year is because he gives you some insurance playing the slot. And he looked really sticky in coverage, really instinctive. And he didn't have the flash plays that Eli Ricks had, but he was way more consistent, and he stacked those good practices throughout the summer. So he would be the guy that would get the nod of the guys that's on the 53 right now. You could always look outside if you don't believe that he can do it. But I think that right now that's why he's here.
Andrew, speaking of the secondary, I want to talk to you about the safeties because Kevon Wallace, he's gone. He's with Arizona. So now you're down to just the four. We know Reed Blankenship is one of the starters. Evans really came on, it seems like, at the end of camp. Terrell Edmonds, I mean, he's just a steady Eddie. We know what we're getting from him. Sidney Brown is the guy that Eagle fans are really, pumped and excited about. So talk to us about the safeties and how you feel about that position, because I know for me, Andrew, that was the position I was watching the most in the past month.
Yeah, for me, I was looking at that backup corner spot and seeing who was going to step up because I really like what Mekhi Garner did, but I can certainly see why he went with the safety position because they had a number of guys. They had 5 guys, and in my mind, I just did not envision them keeping 5 safeties. I didn't think that that was a strong enough unit to warrant carrying 5, especially when you consider that they all more or less had redundant skill sets. So I think Justin Evans gives them more of a pass coverage, versatile safety. That's certainly not his calling card per se, but I think that he's pretty adept at doing that. He's a versatile type of player. Sidney Brown's obviously their most explosive and dynamic player, but he also plays very unrestrained, and he plays on 100 miles an hour. And if you're a defense that prides themselves on eliminating explosive plays, I think initially he may not see the field or he may not be starting, but I think he's going to certainly have a role, definitely on special teams. And Wallace was a player that I did not think would be back in Philadelphia. I thought that he was going to be claimed because of his pedigree playing at Clemson, his draft status. He was a 4th-round pick, and he's still relatively young. He's 26 years old, has played a ton of snaps, good special teamer. So I think that he's going to have a pretty prominent role there in Arizona under with Jonathan Gannon again. So, and then Terrell Edmonds, who you mentioned, is a player that you saw some speculate that he may be released on, you see that on Twitter and things like that. But I never bought into that because what we were seeing at practice is, and you see it in the games, he can step in and be a quasi linebacker type of player, help out in sub packages, those big nickel packages. So he does provide some value, and he may act as somewhat of that 4th linebacker-esque, depending on how he's deployed. But I think that he can give you some value in that and at the second level, perhaps, and give you some flexibility there.
Andrew, do you think that, the starting 2 who begin on week 1 at safety may not be the starting 2 by the time we get to November and December?
Yes, I think it's going to be Reed Blankenship and initially Justin Evans, if that were my guess. That's my read on it right now. But I think in time it's going to be Reed Blankenship and Sidney Brown because Sidney Brown's too talented and too dynamic of a player to keep on the sideline. And I think that he can just be that another tone setter back there, and somebody that reminds me of Bob Sanders. That's sort of his comparison coming out of the draft. And you want to get your playmakers on the field. And I think in time, when the game slows down for him a little bit, and they probably have a little bit more trust that he's not going to necessarily maybe give up the big play, you might see him become. I think you're certainly going to see him become a starter opposite Reed.
I mean, Bob Sanders was Defensive Player of the Year. If Sidney Brown gets that, then he's practically a steal for them.
Well, I'm not saying he is Bob Sanders, to be clear. I'm saying his play style reminds me of Bob Sanders.
Gotcha.
And I believe his college coach also compared his skill set to Bob Sanders.
I'm just saying, I remember when Bob Sanders was healthy. That was the problem with him. I just remember he was a dynamic force of nature. He's the reason why the Colts won that championship, 15 years ago. So,
yeah, Bob Sanders was one of my favorite defensive players ever. So, I love watching him play.
So it's an extra on top of compliment from Andrew DiCecco at Andrew DiCecco on Twitter, joining us on the Elite Acura hotline. Visit Elite Acura during the Summer of Performance event located on Route 73 north of Maple Shade, online at EliteAcura.com. Josh Eddig filling in for Mike Gill here on Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and InsideTheBirds.com is where you find all of Andrew's coverage of the Eagles as well as the NFL draft. Andrew, looking one more position on the defense, I want to touch on with you is talk to me about the defensive line, because the D line is, I know we don't talk about it a lot. I know it's not sexy or anything, but there is a very interesting point, which is they kept a lot of D tackles. So what is your perspective on the D line? Because it almost felt like they kept a couple guys because they were worried they couldn't get them through waivers, basically.
Well, the only one that they would have to worry about getting through waivers that was on the fringe was Moro Ojomo, their 7th-round pick. Kentavious Street was not subject to waivers. He's a veteran, but I think that I had him keeping 7. That was what I had on my 53, and I just know that the team values Kentavious Street maybe more than the fans do. I know that he is a versatile player and he's well thought of within the organization, and my understanding was that there was never really a question of him making the 53 or not. Now, the question really became Moro Ojomo. What do you do with him? Well, he's a really talented player. He has intriguing traits, and he's 21 years old. And if you're a team like the Eagles that really prioritize stockpiling defensive linemen and building towards the future, you don't necessarily want to even potentially expose a player like that through waivers and risk losing him. And Marin Tuipulotu, he kind of flies under the radar, but he had probably his best summer in his 3-year career, and he's the backup nose. So when you look at it, it really came down to Moro Ojomo or Kentavious Street. Kentavious Street wasn't going anywhere, and they weren't going to part with Moro Ojomo. So that's where they're going to go heavy. Obviously, you can't play all those guys on game day, but I think Kentavious Street gives you somebody that's logged a lot of snaps at this level and 26 years old, and he can give you some versatility in there while maybe Ojomo learns the game and gets a little bit more comfortable and gets his sea legs under him. So I think that they have a really good amalgam of talent there at the position.
Couple more for Andrew DiCecco here as we flip over to the offensive side of the ball. Andrew, there's only 4 wide receivers on the active roster, but we kind of knew that already. We all knew that, Brown, Smith, Watkins, Zaccheaus, they were all going to make the team. So talk to the audience about how you expect the Eagles to utilize the slot, because a lot of people are assuming Zaccheaus is going to be in there, but how does Watkins fit in?
Yeah, Watkins can be your vertical guy. Second fastest guy on the team and outside of Devin Allen, and gives the offense a different dimension than what they don't already have. The defense has to account for his speed, and it keeps them honest. But Zaccheaus and Quez Watkins are 2 vastly different players. Watkins is more of the vertical L. He gives you more of a vertical element, whereas Zaccheaus gives you that short area quickness, catch and run, pick up some yards after the catch type of player. So they're both going to have roles. I think Zaccheaus could even see some time as a punt returner if they want to conserve one of their elevations. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. I had him keeping 4. Maybe if Tyreek Cleveland hadn't gotten hurt in the preseason and a scary injury, you may be able to consider him as for that 5th spot, knowing that he played 23 games at the pro level. He did play over 300 snaps for the Denver Broncos on special teams last season. He was considered to be a core member, but I didn't think Joseph Ngata finished this summer strong. I didn't think Britton Covey, he certainly wasn't going to make that team based on merit, and he missed a large chunk of time. And I mean, Devin Allen's 28 years old, and somebody you could probably get through to the practice squad, as you're sort of going through your roster, and sure enough, he did. But he's going to be around if you need him. None of those players, to me, were like must-haves on the 53. You have to keep the 53 best players. Not, you don't just want to, hamstring and try and shoehorn a 5th receiver in just for the sake of doing it. So I think that they have 4 guys on the practice squad they can call up at any given time. So, I think to me, it would be Britton Covey if and when they want to go that surefire punt return route, and then they're probably going to end up signing him to the roster like they did last year.
Andrew, before I let you go, I want to ask you about the one guy who the Eagles traded for this week was Albert Okwuegbunam. I want to ask you, what do you foresee his role is? Because they got 4 tight ends on the roster, and they have Brady Russell on the practice squad.
Yeah, I mean, I like his tape coming out of Missouri. Big-bodied receiver, athletic, and he gives them consider your second tight end is Jack Stoll, who the team likes and he provides a strong blocking presence, but he doesn't give you much as a receiver. I mean, you look at his numbers; they're pretty underwhelming, but that's not why he made the team. he does a lot of the dirty work and frees a lot of guys up to make some of these explosive plays that doesn't necessarily get the headlines. But I think Alberto gives them just a different type of dimension to complement. He more so complements Dallas Goedert. Then you have to wonder what happens with Grant Calcaterra. I think if they have to make a move, he might be a guy that you consider waiving and trying to get through to the practice squad and keeping those three. I think that he's a young player, and he's a player that Alberto I'm talking about, and someone that you can probably maybe even sign to an extension. He's on the last year of his rookie deal, if I'm not mistaken. You could probably, if he shows well, you can probably sign him to an extension early, and then you have a pretty strong gamut of pass catchers at tight end.
He's Andrew DiCecco. Give him a follow on Twitter, X over at Andrew DiCecco from the InsideTheBirds.com, Eagles writer in the Inside the Birds podcast, and the 2023 Eagles roster and practice squad prognostication champion. Congratulations again, Andrew. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, Josh. Talk soon.